Always used to lay you clean up the messes. Down on my knees, thought I couldn't stand up on my own. Turns out sometimes you're stronger alone.
In the 1940s, there was a movie called Gaslight, based on a British play from the 1930s. If you've never seen it, you might want to give it a watch. I found it on YouTube in full for free, and I watched it there. So I'm sure that you can find that as well if you're looking for it, or perhaps I'll link it below in the description. But I'm going to give you a very loosely constructed version of why that movie matters to our discussion today, so as not really to spoil anything should you decide to go watch it. In the old days, you might find a wall sconce that had a gas light in it. That light was a little flame that was fueled by the pressure of the gas that went to the wick. Now, turning on another light in the house might siphon off some of that pressure and cause the light that you were looking at to dim a bit. Turning that second light off might make the first light get brighter again. Does that make sense? No, we're not talking about new light here. We're going somewhere with this. We're going to talk about gaslighting. In the movie, there's a guy that's trying to get away with something, and his wife could be in the way of his plan. So he does everything he can to make her think that she's crazy, that she's sick, and that as such, she can't be trusted, not by the house staff, not by family or friends, not by the neighbors, not by herself. As really a somewhat small part of this, when he's off doing what he's doing and using gas lights, the gas lights in his wife's view tend to get brighter or dimmer. And if she were to tell him that the lights were going crazy, he would basically tell her, "No, sweetie, it's you that's going crazy. The lights are fine." He would invalidate her lived experience and try to replace it with the one that served his purposes. With gaslighting, he or she with the power is controlling the reality of another person. If I'm gaslighting you, I'm going to twist what's real in a way that makes you doubt yourself. You are sick. There's something wrong with you. Can't you see such obvious reality? The reality that I'm trying to provide for you? What's wrong with you? You don't really feel that way, do you? So I'm going to try everything in my power to invalidate you, to keep you off balance and to confuse you. If you're standing in front of me with 2 feet firmly planted on the ground, it's not going to be easy for me to push you around, is it? But if I can get just one of your feet off the ground, or if I can dazzle you with words and scenarios and confuse you and get you dizzy with distorted stories, or maybe throw you a little off balance in those ways, you're much more easily swayed in whatever direction that I want you to go. Now, there are some things that we need to know first about gaslighting and the very nature of it. First, gaslighting isn't something that a person always intentionally does. People aren't typically sitting around with a playbook aimed at exploiting your potential vulnerabilities and executing them with a lot of forethought. But for people that are narcissists or people that are controlling in general, when they feel out of control, you'll see them employ gaslighting to try to regain control, as they've just seen what works over the years in their day-to-day lives. And it helps them to get their way and to feel more in control. It soothes them in a way. Blaming and shaming and invalidating are often hallmarks of gaslighting. We'll get into the specifics more here in a minute as we go. It can be said that there are at least 4 different levels of consciousness when it comes to gaslighting. Number 1, a person gaslights unconsciously and has no idea that they're doing it. Number 2, a person can tell that they're doing something that's off, but they're not exactly sure what. Number 3, a person knows what they're doing and that they're manipulating you, but they excuse it by saying that they're doing it for your own good. Number 4, a person is malicious. They like to watch you dance. They don't care if they hurt you, and they will knowingly use you for whatever it is that they want. Now, most people in our lives probably fall into those first 3 categories. Let me give a little personal example, a little personal experience from my own life. Not exactly something I'm proud of, but you'll understand as we go. Growing up in my family of origin, there was a lot of manipulation. So many lies, so much spin. That was just in the house. It wasn't a mentally or emotionally safe space for anyone. Then came the cult when my parents joined, and in came something that gave them justification and a supporting narrative for even more gaslighting at play. Gaslighting was all around me. It was how people communicated and moved through their day to day lives. Everyone trying to grasp for some measure of control wherever they could find it in a situation that was totally out of control. I would grow up and eventually marry my wife, Jenny. And we both came from very similar environments, in fact. Everything started out fine in our marriage, and without going into all the details and totally derailing this conversation, let's just say that I eventually employed the motivational tactics that were used on me my whole life in my marriage. After all, that's how you have relationships, right? If another person lacks motivation, you motivate them with manipulation in some way. For me, it started off positive, but as life went on, it became more negative. As our life as two ignorant and inexperienced kids that got married way too young and that were set up by failure by a cult that gave us false impressions of what even made a good relationship. As two kids from dysfunctional families that were both repeating roles from their own families, out came the gaslighting. I blamed and shamed the person that I loved, just as I did myself internally my whole life to motivate myself, just as I learned to do, and as was done to me by everyone around me. So it's not like this was my original goal or desire to start off my marriage in that way. It was a pattern that was taught to me environmentally by the people around me. If you're feeling out of control, here's how you get things done. Or here's how you cope. Here's how you try to find a little control somewhere. You motivate yourself or others by making them feel awful, right? The shame, sin, things like that that were done to us, we internalize and do to ourselves. While I forgive myself for how I behaved, and my wife does too, it does leave scars. And it's one of my biggest regrets in life. Although I understand how everything got there, both of us were primed to recreate that situation, and both of us played roles in it. So I went through all of those first three stages of gaslighting mentioned above. At first, I didn't see what I was doing at all. Then, at a point, I realized that I was doing something that was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Eventually, I saw that what I was doing to some extent, but I justified it, as though the ends justify the means. That might sound familiar, as Jehovah's Witnesses' highest goal in life is to see their God murder everyone on earth so that they can live happily and without what they see as a negative influence of the world around them. When you're raised with a thought that the end justifies the horrific actions of the God you serve, it can be easy to justify just about anything. In my case, I wasn't a full-blown narcissist, but I did have some tendencies coming from where I came from. If I was a narcissist, I wouldn't likely have worried about what was going on and have ever been humble enough to see where I was actually the problem, though for a long time, admittedly, I couldn't see it. I was looking, but I had gaslit myself so hard and treated myself so badly internally that honestly, I don't think I could have taken on one more failure on my part, as I would have seen it at that time. I was already teetering on the brink of continuing to exist in this world. I think you know what that means. So I had to get a bit stronger, had to get a bit healthier in general, mentally and emotionally, to even be able to hold or own what I had been a part of. And that happened over time and with a tremendous amount of work on myself. Gaslighting is a tool employed by narcissists who are in love with a version of themselves and their own reflection, needing you to think and act and feel just like they do to prop up their underlying insecurities. In a relationship, gaslighting can be like trying to create a cult of two. That's another discussion. But when I talk about all of this, I want to make it clear that I'm not casting judgments on anybody here. I'm not saying like these are the good people and these are the bad people. I tend to see life as a spectrum of existence. We're all on a spectrum between unhealthy and healthy good and bad. That's kind of reductive and not something that I think really encapsulates the human experience. And really, it kind of resembles that black and white way in which the cult sees the world. So I try to steer clear of that. With that said, there are many common results that come from being in such an environment. And I want to point out that it is environmental because these things that happen to you and that may have produced some of the results that we're going to go over here in a minute, those things can be changed as we change our own internal and external environments. These results don't have to be locked in, and we can find better days and more peace. But here are some common signs that maybe you've been around a lot of gaslighting in your life. This is what it might produce in you internally. Gaslighting makes you doubt your own feelings and reality. It makes you feel stupid, confused, maybe even, quote, crazy. You might feel disappointed in yourself or who you've become. Perhaps you feel like you're too sensitive because people have dismissed hurtful words or actions that they've performed around you by saying things like, you're too sensitive, dismissing your feelings, making it seem like there's some weakness on your part and why you can't take their abuse. Gaslighting makes people feel inadequate, second guessing themselves. If we aren't second guessing ourselves, we might assume that others are doing it and that they must be disappointed in us for some reason. It can be very difficult to make decisions because we've been taught to distrust ourselves. And one of the things that stands out for many is that they apologize for everything they do, everything that they think, for basically taking up space in life. I'm sorry all the time. Again, when a person is gaslighting you, they're trying to get you to replace your thoughts and feelings with theirs. They're trying to get you to disconnect from yourself, to get you to distrust yourself. By doing so, they can gain control over you. In our next installment of this series, we're going to start talking about some of the hallmarks of gaslighting and exactly how they are employed by the cult. But as we go through all of this, I want you to think not just about how you saw these things in the cult that you were exposed to, but also by the individuals. Your mom, your dad, your siblings, extended family, friends, romantic partners, even yourself internally. And we're learning and talking about all of this not to judge, but to understand the impacts on ourselves so that we can understand why we may think and feel some of the ways that we do today. We might start to see that those thoughts and feelings were not originally our own, but they were put there to serve other people and not us. If they were put there, we can work on removing them over time as we heal. They weren't necessarily our thoughts to begin with. If you have an idea for something you'd like to see discussed on the podcast, go to shunnedpodcast.com and submit it through the contact page. If you're struggling to move past the cult of Jehovah's Witnesses and the impacts on your life, I work with many individuals daily in my cult recovery coaching practice where we talk about exactly things like this. We talk about gaslighting. These discussions of gaslighting are something that I often get into with people early in the process to help them on their journey to healing and moving forward. It's very valuable in distancing ourselves from the past, but also in recognizing where we might be repeating some of those patterns ourselves, or maybe which relationships we may still have in our lives that are holding to these patterns. We often repeat the patterns of the past until we're able to see them for what they are. I'm also working hard to bring new resources to the exjw community through efforts to lift individuals up financially through job opportunities, marketing opportunities for your own business ideas, and networking opportunities as well. Go to exjwhelp.com, that's exjwhelp.com, to find these and to find opportunities to help others by supporting these efforts individually. You can get help, and you can also help others there as well. I put a lot of time and effort into all the activism I do. I also put a lot of money into the activism I do, from this podcast and the YouTube channel to things like the XJW cart that I take out, to my initial podcast, XJW Life, that I still host, and the Spanish translation of that, Esta Vida como Testigo de Jehovah. And that's nearing completion as a translation of it in Spanish. All the websites, equipment cost, maintenance, blah, blah, blah. Over the year 2023, my Patreon support fell by a whopping 55%. So if you're listening or watching today and you'd like to support the work I do financially, you can go to patreon.com/shunned to support monthly. So until the next episode, love yourself and others, do no harm, and go be happy.